So let's be informal as long as we can be. If we fill the room up, we'll switch to a microphone and maybe a little more formal setting. But good evening, everybody. I'm Mike Fine. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the state's Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance. We're a state agency that works with school districts, community colleges, charter schools, county offices around the state on a whole variety of topics, predominantly created some 30 years ago by the legislature to focus on fiscal emergencies and crises and preventing them. But we also are in the training business. We train chief business officials around the state that prepare people to be in those roles and do auditing and fraud in school districts and a variety of other things. We also are the state's primary data management arm when it comes to schools. All data reported on kids and teachers goes through systems that we develop and operate for the state. So we have a variety of roles here. I want to thank Andrea White, the Plumas County Superintendent of Schools, for our host, being our host tonight, and my colleague Tammy Montero's with us. We've spent the day here. Andrea facilitated a number of staff and community members and employee associations to come in and spend some time with us today giving input on the attributes that we're looking for in the county administrator that will be appointed here in the next 6 weeks or so to run the Plumas Unified School District through the initial steps of recovery from state receivership. And I'll back up here, and since we're a small crowd, and give you a little bit more background on all of that so you can understand the process. But Tammy and I had the opportunity to take a lot of notes today, and what tonight is about is continuing that, but just open to the general public, staff, others that want to give us input. And so when we get to that step, which will just be a few minutes from now, I want to get started and honor your time and also get you out of here. This is all the input we're going to have tonight. But let me talk first about what the role of the county administrator is, so you understand why we're looking for somebody in that role, and that may guide a little bit of the attributes you want to share with us and what you desire in a person to fill that role. And then we'll talk about the process a little bit. So, actually, I'm going to break it up. I'll talk a little bit about process, then we'll talk about that role, then we'll talk about process some more. It's kind of figuring out what the chicken and the egg here is sometimes difficult, right? What comes first. First off, Plumas Unified School District is upside down financially. And they're upside down to a degree that they can't recover on their own. And so they have sought assistance from the state by way of what we call an emergency apportionment. And what that means is the state's going to advance money to Plumas this summer, or make it available as they need it starting this summer. Money that the state would have otherwise paid them over the next 30 years. They're going to advance that money. We sometimes call it a loan because it looks just like a loan. The district will have to pay it back with interest and with costs. And so, but we don't call it a loan too often because that would be illegal. The district doesn't have the legal authority to borrow money. So the state says, we're gonna, Plumas, basically through analysis that Tammy and our team have done, says that Plumas may need up to about $20 million in help in the next year. And so the state is prepared to advance them $20 million starting as soon as the legislature acts, which we expect to happen in the next 10 days. Will be part of the current on-again, off-again budget negotiations in the state. And so when that happens, the consequences of asking the state for assistance and in advance, the state to advance your money, then under the circumstances that exist here, then the locally elected school board loses its authority to govern the school district. The state doesn't remove them from office because they're locally elected or appointed. The state doesn't have the authority to do that, only a grand jury does. And there's no justification for that here. But the state shifts their authority to govern the district to the county superintendent. in this case, the elected county superintendent role, okay? That's complicated here, Loomis, because you are what we call a single district county. And you have a common board and have had a history of common leadership and different leaders, right? County soup, district soup, or one and the same. So it's a little awkward. The statutes, as we know them, don't fit exactly here for this case. So we've had to craft special provisions in statute that the legislature has basically in negotiations as it relates to it, and then we'll be voting on it here soon. So we are taking the school district board's authority away to govern, but that same board will continue to govern on the county side of the house. Okay, very awkward, right? But we're making it work. We're gonna make it work. And so the person that we're talking about, called the county administrator, not to be confused with the county superintendent, becomes the school district superintendent and the school district board all wrapped up in one person. And you may say that's anti-democratic. Got a lot of anti-democratic conversations going on out there in the world right now. But you may say that's anti-democratic because we're going to ignore the elected body. But the principles here follow the principles of federal bankruptcy law, where a bankruptcy court assigns a trustee to run the business or to close up the business or what have you. When you're in this kind of crisis and distress, you need a single decision point. Decisions can't be delayed. Thus, you don't want to go through the deliberation of a public board meeting and all of those kinds of things. This administrator will sit here and hold a school board meeting, or here, or wherever school board meetings get held. They will do that, but they'll be the only one there, and then the public, right? They will deliberate with themselves. Now, we all do that on our own every day, right? We deliberate with ourselves, and we say yes, and then a second later we say no, and then a second later we say yes, right? That's the process they will go through. But it's not meant to be hidden. It'll be in a meeting that's called, but it won't be a body setting. It'll be a single person setting there. When they adjourn to closed session, for those of you that follow school board meetings, and you know some things are handled in private, when they adjourn to closed session, they'll go out on their step by themselves and have another conversation with themselves and talk to themselves in closed session and come back and announce what their decision was. Right? It's just it's the way it works. So, we're looking to find that person. This community just went through a very similar process as they were searching for a school district superintendent. They hired a recruiting company who had met with staff at community meetings, I believe. And no community meetings, just met with staff and other folks, okay. And they generated input from the people they met with on the attributes and the qualities they were looking for. We're doing the exact same thing, but we are not looking for somebody to come in and be the superintendent here for the next 10 years. We're looking for somebody to come in with a lot of experience on fiscal matters, on making very difficult decisions, quickly assessing the situation, making the decision of what's needed, and standing firm behind that decision, and be in and out. Their job is to work themselves out of the job. So that's a unique party, willing to take risks, leave their current job, come here for just a short period of time. We hope no more than 3 years. It could be longer, but we hope no more than 3 years. Make those difficult decisions, right the ship, rebuild the foundation and the structures that are needed, and then turn it back over to the local board to carry that forward. And the local board then hires a superintendent or has a common superintendent in the county district. Okay? Everything we take by way of your input tonight, attributes that we're looking for, Tammy and I will take notes of those. We ultimately will publish those. We don't attribute them to anybody. We will publish those notes, and we will use those inputs to develop themes of what Loomis is looking for in this person. okay? A theme may be around transparency and honesty, integrity. It may be around instructional leadership. It may be around fiscal leadership. It may be around a good listener, right? Before they make decisions about reductions and things like that, maybe around the collaborative process of listening and working together as a team to inform those decisions, okay? The candidates, when they apply for the job, will have to address those themes in their application. And we will use those themes in our scoring rubric of the applicants. We ultimately will produce a list of applicants that will be in a ranked order based on a score. The score will include statutory requirements. Do they meet these requirements that are in law? Do they meet these themes? And to what degree? What's their education? Credentialed or not credentialed? There's no need for a credential in this case, but if they have one, we will have to decide whether we give extra points for that, those kinds of things. Have they been a successful school business official? That may be an extra thing we put in the rubric, right? That happens to be a statutory requirement. But not that they've been in that role, but we understand. So that's how we use your input. We will publish it all. If you tell us you're looking, one of the attributes is blonde hair, blue eye, female between ages 30 and 40, you'll see us publish that. Now, we may not use that as our criteria, but you will see us publish that as one of the inputs, because we're trying to be very transparent about what we heard and how we used the information, okay? So that's kind of what tonight's about. That's kind of what the job is. Well, let's talk more about the job. The district right now, based on our forecasts, is about $8 billion in the hole out of a $42 million annual budget. So one of the things this person has to do is trim the budget by $8 million out of 42. That is a huge task. That is a large percent. Your deficit in the district is a significant percent of the total budget. More so than any of the other 9 districts in the last 30 years that have gone through this process. Plus, to that $8 million, we now have a principal payment and an interest payment back to the state of the money that the state, if I can use the term, loaned them, right? Plus costs. The administrator costs money. Our agency charges back at a certain point. The state is covering the cost of it. At some point, we will move to the district covers the cost. And all those are factored into the state loan. Okay? We're expecting the authority to be up to $20 million, but we're hoping that we will only draw down from the state what we need. We think that number is closer to 16, maybe 16 and a half. We've got a few new things that will not surprises as we kind of continue to work through past data. So there's a lot of reductions to make in the budget, and those relate to programs, services. This is a system that our education system is about people. We use people to accomplish our goals with kids, and so we are very heavy on staff, as it should be. That's how we accomplish our mission with kids. So there'll be impacts there. There may also be some revenue opportunities. We'll, as administrator, will have to be able to identify those, whether those are short-term grants, whether those are long-term structural things that would generate more revenue. Those kinds of things also have to be looked at. This isn't only about cutting, but it's also about a balanced approach with respect to revenue. The district doesn't have a lot of control over revenue, but it can exercise some. Some of those options may come later, not be in the first couple of years, because some of those options may require voter consent. And right now, I would guess the voters don't have an appetite to send the district more of their money right now, right? So they've got to rebuild trust before they can turn to the voter and ask them for consent to, for example, assess a special tax. So, understand that we're looking for somebody that maybe look a than what you would typically recruit for a superintendent, school superintendent. Okay. The ultimate, hold on one second, I'll give it to you. The ultimate decision on who is hired is a triad of folks. Andrea, as the county superintendent, will make a recommendation to the state superintendent and the president of the State Board of Education. And that triad, those three people have to concur. So the way we structure this process, because the other two generally don't want to be involved in interviews and all of that kind of thing, they turn to the local county superintendent to drive the process. Once we handle the list, we generally recommend you interview the top tier quartile of names, if you will, and then make a decision. They'll generally pick a person, and then they take that forward to the state superintendent and the president of the state board to get concurrence around that. Okay, question?
So sorry to
You're
interrupt you. Since you're on the subject of talking about what a unique situation this is,
Yep.
and talking about what is needed in hiring the right person and finding someone who can do this, I mean, is it realistically possible
Yes.
that this is going to come about and our school district will perhaps get back to a place where?
It will. The question is timing. Yeah, you'll get back to where you need to be. I have absolute faith in that. It's a question of how quick. Okay? And part of that is what kind of leader you get in here and their willingness to make the tough decisions and stand behind those and implement them and see that through. And when they make a decision that's a mistake, to admit that and reevaluate it. Okay? Because they do that. I certainly, as a superintendent, made decisions during the Great Recession on budget cutting in my district. And I had to come forward at a board meeting about 3-4 months later after the new school year started and said that was the stupidest decision. That was the stupidest recommendation I ever made to you as board. I apologize. We need to undo that, right? That may happen, and we need somebody that's willing to do that as well. That's an attribute, right? So our role, FCMAC's role, for this step is a little different than the work we've been doing in the district and the work we will be doing in the district. This is a unique call out in the law for us to do this. So let me talk briefly about the work we've already done and then the work that we will turn to focus on. So we got a phone call from the district in mid-December when they were doing their first interim update to their budget and said things don't look right, this doesn't make sense. So can you take a look and help? That call went to Tammy. She began to assist them a week later or so, more involvement. And at that point, our state colleagues who have oversight over the district and the county called us and said, we need you to get there, right? So Tammy's been engaged with the district and the county here since December. She issued a report probably here on the federal report early April that identified at that point what we believe needed to happen. We approached this work differently than we normally do when a district calls and says we're in trouble. We have a set of analysis that we normally come in and do. In this case, it was very clear that folks didn't have confidence in the numbers. They didn't believe the numbers were correct. Well, there's no point in us doing analysis on that numbers. That would be a complete waste of time. So we came in and did what we call an independent multi-year projection, which looked at the current year plus the next 2 years and compared that to the district's multi-year projection. And they differ by quite a bit. Then we took that data and did a cash flow analysis because that data was negative. We had to determine how much cash does the district have because the definition in California of an insolvent school district is when the district can't meet payroll to pay its employees and it is exhausted and you borrowing opportunities. We have fancy terms for that. They can't meet payroll and they've exhausted alternative liquidity and those kinds of things. But the bottom line is they can't meet payroll. And that's what the state cares about. They don't care whether they can pay PG&E or the textbook vendor or what have you. They do care about employees and their taxes and their retirements, everything that goes with employees' time. So we determined that they would be out of cash somewhere between July and September. which caused us to rechange our focus. And we normally have about 9 months lead time. We like, we have weeks. And so we changed our focus, briefed our colleagues in Sacramento, the governor's staff, and then eventually the legislative staff, and have crafted what we call the emergency enforcement application. Normally it'd be in a separate piece of legislation, you go through the legislative process with hearings and all that. In this case, we are shortcutting all of that because we have a budget, a state budget that needs to be finalized and negotiated between now and June 30th. And so we are inserting the Plumas language into the state budget because it'll get done faster. We can avoid all the hearings, we can avoid some of the debates. We wouldn't have had any trouble either way, but one takes a lot more time. This is just shortcutting time. It's not shortcutting details. It's not shortcutting information. It's just short-term time because in the budget trailer bill there aren't a lot of hearings. It's presented to the legislature 72 hours before the vote. And when it's signed by the governor, it takes effect immediately. To do this as a separate bill, we would have to get urgency legislation, which would have required a 2/3 vote in the legislature. Why I wasn't worried about getting that threshold of votes, it saves us that. So, we crafted language. We could simply turn to code that governs what we call receivership statutes. We could simply turn to code and follow the code because Plumas is a single. And Plumas is also a basic aid district, or what we call community funded district, which means you get an entitlement per student of attendance from the state. The funding formula is, in Plumas' case, you meet that entire entitlement with local property taxes. There is no state aid. And so that's unique. There's about 40 of you in the state. It's unique to have a receivership with a basic aid district. So we had to craft some special provisions because of that. So we've done all that. We finished those negotiations at 5:30 this morning. And they're saying they're ready to go into the budget package. That's been our work to date. Starting in August, we now shift our work. The law requires that within the first 6 months of a receivership, we have to come in and do what's called a comprehensive review, a comprehensive assessment. That assessment looks at about 153 standards that are adopted by the State Board of Education, have already been adopted, across 5 operational areas of the district: facilities management, fiscal, money, personnel management, student achievement, and governance and community relations. So the 153 the standards aren't split equally across those. There's more standards on fiscal than there are on personnel and so on. But we will bring 5 teams, a team for each of those topics, into the district starting in August, and we will lead that effort. They'll be here generally a week at a time. We're going to skip the first week of school, so we'll create more havoc than the first week of school normally has to it. But we'll be here the week before, the week after. We do need to do it after school is back in session, at least the instructional piece, because we use the classrooms, the classroom. So kids need to be able to do that successfully. We intend to have that work wrapped up by Labor Day, and then we have to December to issue a report. It will take us every minute between Labor Day and December. That will be the first comprehensive assessment. We will have a score to it. Each standard gets scored, and then each of the 5 areas gets scored. We'll come back a year later and do the same thing over again, and that is to demonstrate progress towards meeting the standards. There's a minimum score to achieve, and once you achieve that minimum score, that is the justification for the administrator, the position we're talking about tonight, to go away and for the school board to regain their local control over the district. So when I said ideally around 3 years, that's our goal, that's my goal. I won't be here 3 years from now, I'm retired between now and that point. Either that or my wife will be leaving, I suspect. But, I do intend to retire, so that's my goal, sitting here. But it is a quantitative calculation of you either meet the standard or you don't. Well, it's a qualitative analysis of meeting the standard or not, but once you meet it, there's a score assigned. And meeting the minimum score then is the driver for the shift in governance from a single party to back to the school board. Even when that shift happens, then we will go through this exact same process again to hire a trustee who will stay with the district in one way or another for the life of the loan. And they will be looking over the shoulders of the board and the leadership of the district. They have the ability to what we call stay or rescind actions of the board. Will veto actions of the board. They can't make decisions for the board like the administrator can, but they can stop the board from making decisions that are inconsistent with the recovery plan. Okay? So we're kind of in the middle of the work we've done. The work we still have to do, this particular task needs to get done in order for the district to hire this person. Behind the scenes, Tammy and our team continue to support the district, whatever they need. Interim chief business official here, Stephanie, who are supporting on a regular basis. And as they go through what's called the year closing process in July and August, closing the books for this year that will be in there on June 30th. We will help support them to the extent they need it or identify resources that we can call upon. Questions about process, things I didn't cover, and we'll get to all of your
Mr. Fine, could you elaborate the nature of the relationship between this county administrator and our local school board? Is there an advisory capacity?
Yeah, so great question. The board actually shifts to an advisory role, from a governance role to an advisory role. In the early months of this process, you probably won't see the governing board except sitting in the audience of a board meeting. It'll be the administrator that does everything. Eventually, you'll see them phase back up to the dais, and the administrator will say, "What's your input on this item?" Right? And start to solicit their input. Then you'll eventually see it phase into, "Why don't you take an advisory vote?" So you've been given the input, but I still make the decision. Now, I'm going to put this item in front of you, and you're going to vote on it, even though your vote really doesn't count. It'll be advisory to me. I still make the decision, right? And then they'll work towards regaining full authority. So part of that is modeling what good governance is. That's one of the jobs of the administrator. They've got to get the board prepared to govern again. And I think it's fair to say, without being disrespectful, the board is currently not in a position of good governance, and we've not been practicing good governance. So we've got some work there to do. The legislation for Clueless requires the board to go through a series of training programs. Part of that is building their capacity to govern. Now, we can spend a lot of time with individual board members helping them, but then their election comes and goes and they're out and we have somebody new. We have to start that process over again. That's just a matter of how the process works, right? So they have an advisory role, but they do not have a decision.
Right. So can I assume that as a community, our responsibility is to work through those individuals that are represented in the various areas of the county?
It is. But given they don't have a decision-making authority anymore, I would duplicate that input to the county administrator.
Okay.
If you're going to email a board member and say, "I really feel strongly about this," I would copy the county administrator on that email.
Okay.
Or if you're going to have a conversation, pick up the phone, I would do both, right? But I would hope you're representing. You know, we've been in districts where this has happened, where the elected school board member, we don't see them after it happens. They hold the seat, but they just disappear, right? There's no quorum required, there's no attendance required at that point, so they just disappear. I hope that's not the case for you guys. I hope they stay engaged, because my hope for you as a district and a community is you get your local control back much sooner than later. And thus, you're going to be working with the group you know. right? We've got a special election being called, coming up to fill a vacancy here shortly.
Actually, all the board members seats are at 2026, so
All in the same year? What kind of that?
I don't know. So if someone changes seats during that election,
It
it's
should
early
be
on in the
staggered.
process, so
Little
if
harder.
someone who is elected, it would be part of the law.
Your input is just as valuable as it's always been, right? I think you're a great observation, question, who do you give that input to, right? There will still be meetings, so show up and speak your mind, right? There'll still be meetings that it'll just be for a while, you'll be talking to a single person instead of a bot. Okay?
So, to me, this has to be sustainable after you rescue us, and then we have to be able to function in a good way. So there needs to be some aspect of mentoring and passing it on, and I'm not sure, like, if this person, that person that we're talking about, you want to look for, is a great mentor. Is there going to be anyone around that they mentor to?
So they'll mentor the staff, they'll mentor leadership, they won't necessarily be mentoring the next superintendent because that person will come in after them, although they may be selected from the very group they've been mentoring, right? And they'll be mentoring the board.
On how to pick the next person?
Pick the next person, govern a meeting, hold a meeting. I mean, there's some basic elements here we've seen some dysfunction around. Just being honest, I think again, if you're here tonight, you've made those same observations probably. So there's some basic things, right, that the board doesn't do. The other really important thing here, this is a single. We believe strongly that the county and the district are so integrated you can't distinguish the two. And while that brings efficiency, it needs to be separate. So currently you have a single meeting that is of the county board and the district board, those need to be separate. Hold a county board meeting from 5 to 6, then adjourn it, open the school board meeting at 6 o'clock. I'm not making the times up. But don't commingle the two. They have different roles, they have different responsibilities, they have different authorities. They should be separated. We'll work through this same process with regard to staff. Some staff are county staff, some staff are district staff. We need to be clear about the logic of why that is.
Whole administration, all those, aside from the school board, everybody's getting a mentor and
Everybody that chooses to stay.
sounds
So one of your inputs, when we get to that point in a second here, should be somebody that's willing to mentor and coach folks.
Is the administrator going to have any kind of special exemptions from following state law? So, for example, Prop 28 and GABA funding isn't going to be immediately on the top block.
There's no exemptions, so you have to
If there's a
honor,
statutory
well, in
percentage that they
Prop
have to.
28 cases, and it should be with the people, so there's no statutory, there are some statutory elements to it. But
Or
it's in
things
law.
like school fees or,
You need school fees, I think, for parents.
yes,
Okay, they're illegal.
I know they are, but-
Nothing changes.
this district is
Well,
resistant
so
to
then,
that, so.
so then the district needs to follow the law, otherwise they're subjecting themselves to some pretty hefty.
So all of the state things, so like the new ethnic studies, curriculum that's.
Which have been put on hold by the state, but the local district moving forward with it, although I don't know what they're gonna teach because there's disagreement on
But
curriculum.
anything coming down from the state level
All
should be
still
followed.
applies.
Okay.
So let me make an important distinction between federal bankruptcy law and bankruptcy and state receivership laws. In federal bankruptcy, the judge becomes the decision maker of everything and ignore basically everything in the decision. The most important piece of that are collective bargaining agreements. The judge can set all those aside. In state receivership laws, you honor the existing collective bargaining agreements with your employees. It doesn't mean you can't renegotiate it. You can't ask for concessions and renegotiate. But aside from a renegotiation, you honor what is in writing. That's a critically important distinction. So even districts that need to be in receivership, that may not go that route, that wasn't the case here. But in history, we have districts that put off the decision for over a year, got worse and worse and worse. It was ultimately their employees that forced the issue with the decision, because they were worried about getting paid and having their collective bargaining agreement locked. Right? So that's an important distinction. But there are no exceptions to state law. Let me say this. There will be some exceptions to the laws, as you know now, but only to the extent that we've written them into the legislation for rules. So for example, today, if you sell a school site, a vacant school site, you may only use the proceeds of that sale to enhance the other facilities. Build a new, modernize, what have you. You will have an exemption for that. You'll be able to use the proceeds from the sale of the site for general purposes. Pay off the loan, pay down the loan, so you don't have the interest, those things. You will have that exemption for basically until not quite 3 years, out until June 30th of 28 was the deadline for the legislation. Why you do that though, you won't be eligible for other state facility programs, because if you exercise using those proceeds for general purposes instead of facility purposes, you can't then turn around the next day and apply to the state for facilities. That makes sense, right? That's a law. So you would be prohibited from participating in other facility programs if you were to make that decision. Right?
So would that be including like bond measures and stuff?
Not bond measures, but it would include state facility action for bond measures. So
The reimbursement.
there's that exception to give you flexibility if the district wants to use it.
Do we write any other exceptions in there?
I believe, off the top of my head, that's the only exception that we've provided for to existing statute. We've had to craft a lot of new statute, and this is an important review that it will be codified. You won't, tomorrow, after it's passed, the next day we'll open up the ed code and find it in statute, because we're not codifying. It only applies to you. It really doesn't matter whether anybody open up the code and see it apply to them, it won't apply to them. So it's an uncodified statute. It's not a technical, but we will have copy. Oh, we will have. Yeah, it'll be in the budget. It'll be in the trailer. It'll be, it's not hidden yet. It just won't be codified in this.
So they don't have to add it.
We don't have to do that, because part of the logic here is we don't know when to remove it, because we don't know exactly what to do next. Okay. We're also in the statute, but it's not an exception, that we are making this a state general fund loan. There's two ways to get the money. The state general fund, the treasury sends you the money, or the state's infrastructure and economic development bank, called the I-Bank, sells notes to investors, and the proceeds of those note sales come to the district. We didn't elect to do that, but this is a general fund loan. The state has plenty of cash on hand in the treasury, so $20 million out of the state treasury is, we've got about $100 billion on hand. That's really good. That means that you're not subjected to market interest rates, fluctuations, and things like that. The interest that will be charged will be on the date you first draw the money down. It'll be what the state would have otherwise earned on that money on that date, plus 2%. And 2% is the current cost. So it is a more stable, and we don't have to go through the secondary financing activity for 3 months or so, which is very expensive for this house.
On that real estate issue, this, again, we're talking about the prerogative of the administrator. My other question is, when it comes to the point of paying that money back, the state loan situation. Obviously, that's something this community is going to have to decide, or would this be decided in the process?
No, it's decided by
The
the
receivership that we're talking.
It's decided by the state. You will get a payment schedule from the state on the day that it's due.
Okay, coming up with that
oh, that's the administrators, that's the tough decisions that administrator has to make.
So that would be the prerogative of the county administrator, right?
Now, let me say this, my team can balance your budget. But we don't live here, we're not part of this community, we don't have necessarily the affinity to this organization, right, at this stage of the game. So we don't think those would be wise decisions by us necessarily. There's lots of low-hanging fruit probably we could easily go after. But deep, difficult decisions, we think should come from somebody that's now part of your community, i.e. the county administrator. After they get to know them, they've been here, they talk to people. But if we needed to balance your budget tomorrow, we could balance your budget. We've been in those roles, we understand that process, we know what to do, right? They just simply won't be great decisions. We think it's far better to have those decisions made by the county administrator after they've been here a while. So if they arrive sometime in August, in theory, they have up to about 1st of February to make those decisions to start to enact them next spring. And that's a decent amount of time to meet with the community, to be engaged, to meet with folks, to listen, to do all that so they can make some informed decisions. But let me say this, there's no county administrator out there that's going to make those decisions purely on their own. They're going to seek, if they're smart, they're going to seek the advice of the board. They're going to seek the advice of the staff. They're going to seek the advice of their partners, their labor partners. They're going to seek the advice of the community. If they don't do that, very frankly, we would be raising a red flag in our comprehensive analysis that says, this ain't working. This isn't being handled properly, right? We would be raising that red flag. So they need time to do that. It's interesting. Statute only gives them 30 days to do that. But there's no practical reason to make that decision in the first 30 days because you can't really affect it until the next year. If they come in August, they basically have 11 months before it takes effect. So we will be encouraging them, take your time. I hate to say we'd be encouraging you to ignore statute, but we'd say you're going to make a better decision by spending a little bit more time on this. There's nothing to be accomplished in that first 30 days, right? Except figure out where you're going to set, how to work the phone system, the computer, and those things, right? Get to know it. Great question.
I'm wondering if there's any data available on how this process impacts the enrollment rates. Is it
Drops. People don't like to have their kids what they consider a failure.
And there's people here that don't really have too much choice.
They don't. That's
But we're
unique
trying to
this
bring
year.
more families here, and this is,
So,
is there any landmark spots along the process where we get rated on how we're doing? And
yeah, the comprehensive assessment,
where the
And-
public information
it's
is
all public.
on our way out?
It's the stuff where they rate us on silliness numbers now.
Yeah.
Is it public though?
Oh, yes, everything we do is public.
It's very similar to the LCAP.
I think if you go out to thickmat.org /Plumas, you will find all of our current information on Plumas, but off to the side will be examples of a comprehensive review that we just did in Inglewood Unified. It happens to be their 12th, we're about to publish their 13th one. It's 700 some pages. I think 600 some pages, 700 some recommendations, so it's a little overwhelming, but if you glance at it, pick one section. Pick one section.
If you're a parent looking for a place to move, and you're thinking about this, is there some source where it's easy to find where we're standing in this?
We would have it all linked to our website, everything that FitMat publishes about
I
our
understand
district.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is on our website.
So- So state testing is all published, you can compare schools, you can do that now, right? Some realty companies have lots of comparisons, I would question. The state dashboard. The yes, or the state testing shows up, the dashboard, more than just test scores. It includes local, what we call local indicators, chronic absenteeism rates, period, discipline, suspensions, expulsions, all that kind of information. That's all readily available. We'd be happy to point you in the right direction.
I think the district can also just help us out with some too.
Yeah, I'm just so sad.
I mean, marketing positive.
This is a different, because of your location, you have limited competition.
We're a charter school.
It's true, that's true. I'm interested in revitalization of this community, and I think one of the strongest things we need is
Schools.
good schools, because we need families here, more families.
I would completely agree.
So,
It's key to any revitalization, is solid schools. No question about it. Lots of data that takes into account.
I would argue that the school market issue with system leadership.
right over here.
And it's,
It is.
But let me say this, we visit a lot of districts that are in distress, not at this point of distress. You have a lot going for you that they don't. When we visit your facilities, they're in very decent, good condition. We haven't been in your classrooms yet. I expect we're gonna find good instruction. We're gonna find the right environments in your classrooms, with qualified teachers. The district needs to do a better job of reporting data, because right now it would appear that only 25% of your teachers have 4-year degrees. Well, we know that can't be true.
It isn't.
But, well, we know that can't be true, but somebody misreported, right? Along the way, in data collection, they misreported. That actually is in the legislation, because the state's a little ticked off, because it shows you in a whole different light, and that they know can't be true. You don't get a credential in California without a bachelor's degree, and so the two kind of have to go hand in hand, but the data was not reported that way. Probably just a simple clerical error in reporting, but nonetheless, it wasn't checked, it wasn't validated until much too late. Until it made it all the way to the state, which reported out. So there are things like that. But we've seen good things here.
We don't have
So-
a library much.
Well,
That's a big thing we don't.
We're not.
Yeah, Little County, like there's no library hardly at all.
so maybe there's a revenue opportunity. There's no county library.
No, there is the county library, but the schools don't have libraries that are very active or very many hours and they're run by people that know how to check out.
So maybe there's a revenue opportunity that saves the county some money and brings some revenue into this by replacing the county libraries with the schools libraries. And you shift that up, instead of the county operating library systems, they now partner through a joint powers authority or something else with the school to actually do that. And have them stay open then in the evening and on weekends, where you also have maybe tutoring and some other things. We start to be creative when you get into, we should be creative all the time, but you start to get a little bit more pressure on being creative, right? If it saves the county some dollars and the county then could invest in the school libraries in exchange, there could be a win-win, right? So let's get to, I want to get to your input because that's what we're here for.
It's one on the structure. I'm still unclear on what the county superintendent, will they be doing anything in this closet? Or is that still a complete separate unit? And you'll just be doing your job?
The county administrator will report on a daily basis to the county superintendent. That is their daily supervisor. While they enjoy quite a bit of independence, and some decisions have to be made not only by the county superintendent, but by that triad I talked about earlier.
Okay.
The statute calls out a specific role for the county administrator in certain things that he can do. County superintendent has a full-time job,
That's what it's not gonna.
and in the short term, the county superintendent, will be the interim district superintendent, and some other administrators here as well.
What was that Big Mac address?
BigNet.org.
It's on our website.
It's on.
I can run your card.
We're gonna put it on the
I'll
Yeah.
put it in the article.
That's
So, I want to get to what we came for tonight, which is to hear your input on the attributes of the person that we are, trying to fill the position. Okay, all yours.
My own suggestion is, it's based on what I had as good supervisor and manager.
Straight, please.
I would really appreciate the managers that were the first ones there, the last ones to leave. They took the time, and I realized, you said, that in the beginning, they would probably have not so much diving into the work, but getting to know the employees. The school districts go to all the sites, understand how they all run, and basically make it their whole life for the few years they're here. And hopefully fix it.
Great.
An individual who understands rural communities, I mean, that should always be a given, but we're up here at the end of the road, that's it. Some strange, people.
We just had a conversation about mountain people. And I was a former mountain person, so I was making fun of her until I thought, oh, where am I today?
You're outnumbered.
I am outnumbered, so great
And which
opportunity.
one of these individuals is that?
That's me,
That was you?
that was me. I lived in Amarillo, I was born and raised in Sonora, California, very small.
Sure.
And one time at Costco, I got called a mountain person when I was checking out.
And that was okay with you, because fine with it, okay, good.
That's not
That's not what she said.
Bad.
You said you were profiling me. You said you were at Costco or something. They were profiling me.
They were.
It was those overalls you were.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Others, yeah.
I would say someone obviously who has previous experience in trying to dig out of such a hole.
I'm sure you've heard from some of my union brothers and sisters earlier today.
What, from one?
I was teaching summer school. We want somebody who wants to collaborate. More than listen. We're actually involved in shared decision. We don't get the authority to make the decision. None of us stepped up for that job. But we did step up for the job to advocate for each other and for the children. And so we are looking for somebody who wants to work with us. We have, I think Andrea can agree with this too, I think we have come to a place with the district staff and at least PCTA, we're looking in each other's eyes and we kind of trust them. We can move forward. I'm delighted. We want a partner who can lead us. And yes, we know. Honestly, if we can get the ugly Christmas present, we would prefer it because it gives us more time to prepare our managers. Because we know it's going to hurt. Everybody's going to feel some pain. And it wasn't our fault, but it is ours. Suck it up, we're human beings, we're on the planet, things happen. The other thing that we're looking for is somebody who counteracts the habit that lots and lots of places, including Plymouth, have, which is to put together a plan that looks good in the moment, not really assess the plan, just engage with it until it breaks, and then fix the broken plan. Repair the broken plan, rather than stop, that didn't work. We need to build something new. We need somebody who's going to help us build something new, who's going to work with us from new. And I couldn't agree more. Let's find ways to make money too. School's more expensive, period. Everything is more expensive because the economy's decided to grow. We gotta find a way to make some money too, because property taxes is not just gonna go.
someone who can bring together people and lead. And an innovative problem solver who's willing to mentor. Good leadership embodies a lot of qualities. Listening, communicating, and we go to really.
I'm gonna be the meanie. I want somebody who is truly impartial, that doesn't have any connections whatsoever to local staff or leadership, somebody who is not gonna have any conflicts of interest. Because we have a lot of broken trust in this community on that level. And I also really want somebody who understands what attracts people to, or can listen to what attracts people to enroll their students into USD. And a lot of that comes down to things like visual and performing arts opportunities and enrichment things, which are usually the first in the action and have much problems. But if you lose the things that attract your enrollment, is that really making financial sense?
Let me ask you a question. You go as far as saying you don't want anybody that works here or that previously worked here? Would you go that far?
I would say that.
You would go that far?
Yes,
It is incredibly
no matter who you pick, somebody that every people know, there's different people that are automatically gonna decide they're bad. Because they,
I guess I'm just curious on, finding, the reality of finding that person who, because of our location.
Yeah, so there's no question in our mind, 50% of the ballot here is going to be finding somebody else that they lose. And we do think they need to be here. We don't think this is a remote job. We don't think this is a stop in every other week job. Does it need to be 5 days a week? They're going to have to be engaged 7 days a week, 24 hours. Do they have to be here 5 days a week? I think there's probably some flexibility there, but we agree that's half the battle. So, and part of the, I don't know what to call it, part of the issue here is we don't want anybody that's been here, probably not here. That eliminates probably some folks that are willing to come here that were once here and left, right? And so I get both points completely. We'll have to find a balance. I just was being partial, I wanted to see how far that kind of went, right? Just to get a sense. You would not be the only ones that we heard from today that said absolutely nobody that has any connection, right?
Well, and
You're not
I
alone.
acknowledge your point, because both when I was in high school and when my son was in high school, and it was both here, we went through a principal a year.
Yeah.
So that's 12 people that could potentially have moved on in their careers and were in the pool. We did have an incredible amount of turnover, but I think that especially in the last 10 years, that would be an absolute no. If you're talking 20 years ago or 30 years ago, then maybe.
Okay. All right. That's good. But somehow we have to find a balance.
And that's what I think is, because my first thought would be, oh, nobody, like, this has to be so impartial, but at the same time, we're in such a unique situation that, we want someone who's going to have that touch them in this, yes, you have to make their decisions, but you gotta realize we all have to look at those decisions that person makes for our students.
Other input? Madam Reporter, you.
Oh, I have a lot, but I better not say.
You can put the pen down and be a citizen, boy.
I understand you're trying to keep roles separate,
Yeah.
but then feel free as a resident, to communicate with us
Change
separately.
your hat, speak up.
Yeah, I understand, I didn't mean to put you in an awkward spot, but,
Yeah, no, I agree with what everybody said, somebody who can handle conflict, because there's gonna be a lot of conflict when you're closing programs and closing schools and how is that person gonna say no when, I mean, I've been here when they tried to close schools and I was a supervisor and the room was filled, there were people yelling, it gets really emotional. Well, we had our emotions. We had our emotions here too. But anyway, somebody who can handle conflict, because that's what's hard. And Quincy gets, I'm gonna say it, I was supervisor 12 years, they fight about everything. Where the courthouse will be, which school to close. They come up and fight pretty good, I'll tell you.
She's not wrong.
What they're talking about as far as having someone here who is completely separate from this county. I don't know that I would feel that has to be like, if we find someone who meets all this other criteria that we're like, this is a great person, they have ties. I don't feel like that should be automatically kicking them out.
yeah,
That these things are pile up and pros all over them.
yeah, we'll figure out how to strike a balance there. What we may do in our rubric is just note whether they have previous experience. I don't know that we would add points or take points away kind of thing in scoring, but maybe make it a note so that it's part of the decision making, and make sure that that clearly outweighs, that one clearly outweighs the other. Yeah,
Only the decision-making interest.
Yeah.
Handing it down.
yeah.
Can you do a baggage assessment?
Well, to a certain extent, so one of our struggles in California is, we call it the dance of the limits, okay?
I mean, there's people that might be really good and don't have a lot of baggage, as you say, you know?
One of the things in California, up until more recently, is we have a way of burying baggage. I can't tell you, the school people that have been horrible, that always land on their feet. And then really good folks, don't land on their feet. They change professions and everything else. And whether that's a teacher or a principal, a superintendent, it continues after almost 40 years to amaze me that happens. But we're doing better about, we have a law now that's brand new. We're about to have a new law that I wrote. I hope we're about to have it. Where at least things like even egregious behavior is now tracked. Up to this point, we've not been tracking egregious behavior. If a district chose not to tell another employer that the reason they left was over egregious behavior, and I realize we may have some differences here, but we believe strongly that if that's documented and investigated and held that was the case, it needs to be reported as such. Whether they take their, I'm not talking about taking their credentials, we know when their credentials are. But the law that we have right now that was just passed is only for credentialed employees. What about everybody else? And so that's the language I have written is to apply those standards all over, not just credentialed employees. So it's relatively narrow, but districts do a great job of varying that stuff.
They do not share what people leave. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and so under the new law, it would be limited to just the documented egregious behavior that's been investigated. And I don't want to say adjudicated, that's too strong, but it's just been investigated. And found to be true. Yeah, we have a pretty good network. We have a pretty good network to check on folks. We got a lot of folks out there that we work with all the time, and this is a very important appointment, not for just Plumas, but it's an important appointment for the state, and for those of us that work across the state. So we will be very thorough to the extent we can in our back, for lack of a better term, background.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Well,
it's
unfortunately,
part
that
of
just
why we're
happened.
here, it's part of why we're here.
That happens.
Mill, right on.
That absolutely happens, and even really good HR departments sometimes struggle with that.
Or they didn't know about it when they hired you.
Well, and it's hard to distinguish which case it is. Did you miss it? Well, was it not evident, or did you know and make a decision? And let me say this, and we heard from somebody earlier today, and it was an excellent, excellent point. Just because there's baggage, just because there's been some mistakes, is that a disqualifier? What they really want to know is how did they recover from that? How did they handle and work through that process and make things right? That's equally as important. I mean, my goodness, guys, I'm just going to say it, not a single one of us are perfect. I certainly make this mistake at least once an hour, if not, according to my wife, 60 times an hour, right? So, and she's right. I have to just say that. She's always right. But, you know, how do we learn from that? How do we recover from that? How do we move forward from that? It's sometimes just as easily as just replace the mistake. So, my goodness, if all my mistakes were documented, I would be. Other input?
The union believes this is going to work. Things are going to be okay. In fact, I'll put it out there now. 5 years from now, there will be other districts in the state of California calling us to go, how did you do it? Would you show us how?
Is the administrator allowed to advocate for funding changes at state level, or they
Well,
can't?
certainly everybody is, but that process is.
I know it's excruciatingly slow and not gonna happen currently, but, part of, this district has been having fiscal issues since the timber receipts ended in the 1990s.
Since when?
The timber,
Oh,
when the timber
timbers.
was under in the 1990s, I spent my high school watching my teacher get pink slips and watched them again in 2008, the same teachers get pink slips. We have structural issues because of our geography and our facilities costs here. We've done things where, in the past, that have worked fiscally, and I hope we get somebody who will look at what we've done successfully in the past, that we've kind of gotten away from. We used to have split classes, and people were upset about that, and so we staffed up to avoid split classes. Well, sometimes we might not have to work with that.
Split class,
Which is like-
being combo classes, 2
Fourth,
grades.
fifth grades
Oh,
together,
alright.
so you have like, if you have 45
Just
kids,
sure.
you have 30 fourth graders.
I got it.
fourth kids.
I understand.
So we did all of that, we had at one point, we had closed the school, but I don't think that's gonna work again, based on our enrollment numbers. But there's things that we've done in the past where we weren't so, we didn't go on with that.
Yeah, so, Andrew, can you verify this? Somebody mentioned to us that Plymouth is the second largest beneficiary of the federal rural,
The secure rural schools funding, we are.
which is forestry, which is timber, federal timber.
Yes, but that's the replacement that they did when the timber receipts fell, when they stopped doing the 1990s, and it was nowhere near the.
So I was a little blown away by the idea that Plymouth was the second largest in the country.
It's per capita, it's not.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yes, no, absolutely.
Because I made a note earlier today to go research that,
It is
because
per
you
capita.
know that is a threatened federal funding.
Oh, they didn't know it, yeah, I'm aware.
Well,
It's now attached to
done,
a
I
new
mean, I
bill.
realize in this first phase of things, but
Sarah hasn't spoken yet.
that's what I'm saying, that's what I'm saying.
And so it's made
About
changes,
selling
so we
off.
got reconciliation.
I got it.
But what happened was in the 1990s, we would get a percentage of sales of all the timber, and
Yes.
have a ton of mills.
Yes,
And it was probably 5 times what we get in secure rural schools. So secure rural schools was was put in place in, I think it was 2001, to kind of sort of help, but it doesn't help enough.
Okay.
So all of these facilities were built prior to that. Our expectations in the community are all based on that previous bunch of money to run all these schools. But we also have an hour between schools.
Yeah, oh, no,
So I'm not sure,
and that's without the construction.
that's without winter.
And without the,
It should be on the road.
So there's some things that are just not fixable, that are structural.